number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
Welcome to Spotlight on the Arts. I'm Patrick Christiana, your host, the publisher of TheaterLife.com, a website for theater buffs covering everything theater. And I'm coming to you from the LTV studio in Wainscott, where I have a really special guest today, my friend Terry Wallace, an author and the owner of Wallace Gallery that's in the passageway opposite the East Hampton Cinema for 26 years now, Terry.
26 years, it goes fast though, Patrick.
Thank you so much for coming on to do this. It's a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure to be here.
No, it's mutual.
No, my pleasure.
Terry, I'm learning all about you. I know you for 26 years, and every 5 years I learn something that you did that I didn't know about, and you've been doing it forever, and you're just a man of so many different talents.
It's funny because, you know, all the years we do know each other, which is probably since the 80s, I'm sure.
It's at least 26.
Yeah. In fact, you one time sold me a piece of real estate that one of my greatest things is the property over in Amagansett, which is, you know, I renovated, and I knew it as a kid, went there, and you helped me buy it, and will always be appreciative of
Well,
that.
I was always appreciative of working with you. It was a terrific experience. I loved that property too. I was high on it. It was great to have someone like you appreciate it like I did too.
No, it was great. It was a great property. But I've been, as you know, I came out to the East End. I had various businesses, and then I ended up in the art gallery. A lot of people didn't know that I was involved in the art business, or that I even had a love for it. But I basically started when I was in the pension business for 20 years. And
I find this, by the way, a fascinating nuance to your journey, how these foreigners, these Italian men, triggered what you're about to tell us. So I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just find it really fascinating that was the trigger for getting you to start the gallery. Tell us.
It is funny. When I was a kid, I mentioned to you earlier that I lived in Italy. My father was in a NATO missile program. And as a young...
Aren't you lucky?
I was very lucky because I was able to go to places like the Sistine Chapel and to the Spanish Steps, the catacombs, and I really learned a lot about history and the appreciation of early art, especially like Michelangelo and David, artist Titian, guys like that. And so I always loved art. As I got older, and my father got out of the military, I went into the pension program. And I worked for a company up the island, and which did pensions. And in the company were these two elderly Italian men who liked me very much because I was a little blonde-haired guy that could speak Italian. And they had escaped Mussolini before the war, and they had come to settle in America, but their accents were very heavy. And they also still carried a lot of the old country with them. So anyway, when the pension business came in, they said to me, would you come into business with us? And because they couldn't read the fine print in the contracts. I was very fortunate. I had a college education, and so it was not hard for me. And after I worked for them for maybe a month and a half, I said, when do we get paid? And he said, one guy in a very heavy Italian accent says to me, we don't put the money in a bank. You know who a Mussolini is. I said, I know who Mussolini is, but what does that have to do? We don't put the money in a bank. I said, so what do you do? He said, what we do is we buy a paint, we buy a lamp, we buy a furniture, we buy a rug, and then we sell it, we get a cash. So I said, well, I have young children. I need cash. Don't worry, we're going to start doing it. And so I went with them to an art gallery in New York, and we bought a painting by a Martha Walter. And we sold the painting with the commissions we got we made a very good amount of money on it. And I
What kind
started
of percentage? How much? Like double what you pay?
3 times our money.
3 times your money.
And these guys have been doing it all along. So one day I said to them, why are we buying one painting? They said, what do you mean? I said, we should be buying estates.
Oh.
Because if we're buying a painting for $10,000, maybe we could buy 100 paintings for $10,000. And they said, really? I said, yeah. And that's how I really started. Eventually, I came out to the East End.
So, from that point, you started collecting an inventory of artwork yourself.
Yes, I started. When they started to open my eyes a little bit to it, I started to do.
So this is like 30 years ago?
50
years ago.
Was in
so you started
80s.
collecting an inventory of paintings 50 years ago.
80. It was in the 80s, yeah.
Mostly 19th and 20th century artists.
Mostly 1870 to 1900.
Okay.
1920, 1930. And I eventually came out to the East End, moved here full time, and I really wanted to learn about the art business. My wife.
So what year did you move here?
It was, I bought my house here in 78, but I didn't move out full time until 86, 87.
Okay.
And at that time, I had met my future wife. She was
But
working.
so you moved out here and you had a collection of artwork already.
I already had some.
a really important collection of artwork.
Yeah, because what I did was I only bought for myself
Right.
paintings of Eastern Long Island because I loved Eastern Long Island.
So did you know in the back of your head that you might open a gallery, or was it just instinctive?
Not right away. What happened was I met this
So
girl.
so all the paintings that you were buying for the Eastern Long Island that would really be marketable here, you didn't think about it.
Never thought about it. I just bought them for
But you
myself.
instinctively kind of.
No,
I mean,
bought them
some
for
way.
myself.
Yeah.
And
It's very interesting. Very interesting.
I never had a retail business, and a guy owed me some money. I owned a few condominiums in Montauk. And in lieu of the money, the guy who had sold this business on Main Street was a David's Cookies. He said to me, why don't you take the David's Cookies? And in lieu of the money the guy owes you, because he owes me money too. So I said, okay. Never went into retail business, but what I got out of that is I met a young lady who
Where was
worked
the David Cookies?
next to the theater in East Hampton.
Oh, okay, so that David Cookie. Okay,
Yeah,
I remember.
so I
So that
had
was your first retail business.
First retail. I never had a retail business, and I got to know it. You know, at that time, you know how the village was. It was small. I got to know everybody in the village.
I think that even may be where I met you the very first time.
Because you were next door at Cook Pony Farm.
Yeah,
I
no,
think,
I was
right?
with Harold Shepard, I think, at the time.
At the beginning, or I can't
At
remember.
one point, I did
Maybe.
with everybody.
But Harold, was a very good friend of mine.
Yeah,
and I loved Harold.
Harold was very instrumental
He's
in
a
my
very
real
good
estate.
guy.
But you know, our time is going really fast, believe it or not. I want to talk about your books.
Okay.
So not that this isn't important equally, but so you had a body of artwork, and
That's right.
you made the connection over there, and you finally got into real estate, and this made you translate it eventually into the gallery that is now over there in the passageway
alleyway.
for 26 years. So when did you write the first book?
Well, I wrote the first book in 2006, but
So let's show them the first book. The first book was this one, in 2006.
Yeah, I wrote the 2006 Caroline M. Bell and the Peconic Bay Impressionists, and then in 2010 I wrote the Helen M. Kroger book.
Let's see the other book, Riley. So you wrote these two, and this one covers the Peconic Bay Impressionists, and then the Anchorage Studio. And with the
reason I did it is that I would go over to the North Fork once or twice a week, and I would go to junk shops, I would go to antique shops, and I started buying paintings. A lot of the paintings were only signed with the first initial and last name. I get about 60 paintings together, and one day I wanted to decide I wanted to learn something about, about the artists. And I happened to get a cup of coffee and a sandwich at the Hess station over there in Mattatuck. And I thought, let me find a nice quiet place to have lunch. So I went into a cemetery across the street. I drove in the back of the cemetery and I saw Caroline Bell's headstone. And I thought, I can learn about all the artists on the North Fork if I go to all the cemeteries. Because unlike the South Shore, people keep their houses for 5 generations there. Here we keep them for 5 minutes. So that day I jumped out of my car and I got 5 artists that I had collected the paintings. And so what's good about the cemetery I found was that it has all the genealogy, the mothers and the fathers and the children, because a lot of these artists died in the
Did you actually find this on the gravestone?
Yeah, because, you
It's
know, you
all
go
this-
in a cemetery and it has, you know.
How ingenious.
So I went to all the cemeteries on the North Fork and I got all the information from these artists, and then decided that I would write a book about it. And so I wrote the book Caroline M. Bell, because Caroline Bell was a leader. What fascinated me about her was her father was a very famous photographer in Washington, him and his brother. They cataloged the American Indian at the end of the 19th century, like we catalog criminals.
Mm-hmm.
And that was
Wow.
interesting to me. They would bring the Indians and they would photograph them just so that they knew who they were. And the parents had gotten divorced, and Caroline Bell moved to the east end of Long Island. Well, her uncle was Alexander Graham Bell. And when her father passed away, and the brother, Alexander Graham Bell, bought all the negatives and donated them to the National Gallery. So I was automatically interested in her when I started to learn about her, and then I got more interested in the artists. And so I gave the artist the name Peconic Bay Impressionists, and then started to market the work. And then I quietly bought about 3,000 paintings by these artists and
That's
started
smart.
to market.
That's very clever, very smart, very smart. And then you wrote another book that focused on them
Yeah,
as
the
well.
Helen Kroger and the Otto Kurth. What fascinating me about them is that Otto Kurth and Helen Kroger were not married. Otto Kurth was married to another woman, and she wouldn't divorce him. But Caroline Bell passed her painting techniques on to Helen Kroger, and then Helen Kroger had about 100 students on the east end of Long Island. So, and that brought me to the end, and to the end of the whole cycle from when Caroline Bell started in, say, 1890 until 2010, something like that. And then I wrote this book
And
on
this
Cappy
is he's a Cappy. Tell us his real name, because I can't even pronounce it.
Cappy, well, Cappy Amundsen, I call him, but most people pronounce it Amundsen.
Okay.
And most people in Sag Harbor would say that's an Amundsen painting.
And the Munson painting.
And what
Did
fascinated...
he change his name to Emerson later on?
Well, he started as Emerson.
Oh, so he started as Emerson.
And then he told everybody that his great uncle was the explorer, Amundsen. And so he changed it to Amundsen. And the reason he did that was because he started painting under a variety of aliases.
But wait. Just tell me now, when did you first come into your consciousness that you knew, and did you have any of his paintings in your collection already?
There's a man by the name of Tony Pintero who lived over in North Sea, over in North Haven. And he asked me if I ever had any Cappy Amundsen paintings, and I said I'd never heard of them. And what I learned later was that Tony had helped Cappy Amundsen with money, and Cappy was kind of down on his luck. But Cappy lived on a corner of Germain and Madison. There's a decorator there today across from where Bob Hand, the bird carver, is.
When did he die, Cappy?
Died in 2000.
2000. He's been done quite. So you had to do a lot of research on him to actually do this book, because we have about 12 minutes. Believe it or not, the time goes so fast, and I want to.
How many minutes?
12.
Okay.
So I want to get into Cappy because he's such an extraordinary character.
Yeah.
I mean, he wrote under all these aliases.
Yep.
Because why did he do that?
Well, he built the place when he was a young man. He built the place in New Hampshire where they hid communists during the McCarthy era.
Mm-hmm.
And the name of he was painting just under the name Emerson. And the sheriff in Conway, New Hampshire, his name was Enright. He spelt his name Enwrite, John James Enright. So Cappy Amundsen started to do his paintings and signed them J.J. Enright, and he spelt them Enwright. So they sounded the name, but the spelling was different, just to tweak them a little.
Right.
And then what he did was he started to paint under different names: McKay, Ward, Hughes, Howard.
And all these paintings sold too, right?
Not only so, well, one of the things about Amundsen is he was one of the originators of the Washington Square Art Show.
That I thought was fascinating too, yes.
Him, Pollock, and de Kooning, they started because they were desperate. Pollock and de Kooning really had a tough time because their painting still had not come into favor.
Right.
And his paintings, where he worked for Motorboating Magazine, he was making the most money. And he would put the paintings up on the wall and he would say, you could buy an Amundsen for $300. If that's too much, I have a guy who's a great painter. His name is J.J. Enright. His paintings are almost as good. They're $200. And by the way, I have another great marine painter. His name is William Hughes. His paintings are only $100.
So he had all the price ranges covered,
that's right? And that's how he made money. So
they would sell something to no matter whatever price range you had.
Yeah. In other words, if he had someone interested in marine painting, he'd get you. He'd reel you in one way or the other. Anyway, he.
Now, what I find so fascinating about this guy, he wasn't just an artist. I mean,
incredible
he was an incredible sailor, a fisherman.
Yep. He was a real community activist in Sag Harbor. And the reason once Tony Pintaro started to tell me about him and educate me about him, I started to talk to people in the village of Sag Harbor, and they told me the same thing. He was basically the town drunk. People didn't realize, he had so many talents, And so I thought, geez, I better do something. Because guys like John Ward and Freelander, they were still alive. His friends. And he had two main brothers that helped him in Sag Harbor, the Barry brothers. Ironically, they were war heroes. And they protected Cappy Amundsen, even though he was a real leftist and he was a draft dodger, burnt his draft card, the whole 9 yards. But they protected him in Sag Harbor, and they were fishing and hunting buddies. And well, anyway,
what was the motivation?
They knew him since he was a kid because Cappy's father was a very famous artist, and what the father did is he had the Emerson girl. It was during print media. It was like the Gibson girl, okay, and he would bring these young models out to Sag Harbor. He was married. And he would say to his wife, I'm bringing my son with me, and I'll let him, we're going to do a little fishing, and I'm going to do a little artwork. And meanwhile, he'd go to the American Hotel and have one of these young beauties meet him there. And he'd send the kid off fishing with the Barrys and with some of the other guys, local guys. And so Cappy was going to Sag Harbor his whole life. Cappy was, one of the big things with Cappy is he started the Harbor Fest for the whaling. He bought the first ambulance in Sag Harbor with the motorboating regatta. It was their very first thing.
And he was an activist from a very young age.
Oh,
because there was the incident where he had a photograph, was it? No, he had a drawing, was it, of Hitler in the Metropolitan
Yes, he did
Museum?
in 1934.
He was only 19.
He did an exhibition, it was during the Depression, at the Metropolitan Museum. And he depicted Hitler half human and half devil. And the American Jewish Congress picked it up. It was featured in Time magazine. He was only 19 years old. And he was basically, the American Jewish Congress said, here's this young man who has the insight to see what is going to happen in Europe. And the guy was an amazing, amazing guy. But like I said, by the end of his life, people knew him as a pool player and as a town drunk.
He inspired Paul Newman, you told me, too.
That's right. Paul Newman was one of the guys hung out in Sag Harbor, and he inspired him to do the movie The Hustler, because this guy was a real character. And I was very fortunate when I did this book.
You never got to meet him, did you?
Never. Tony Pintaro said to me, why don't you come with me up to meet him in East Mauritius? He was in a home. And I didn't go. It's one of the things that I'm sorriest that I never did, because just to talk to him for a few minutes, I think I would have even gotten, a better grip of his life. But what happened was I used to have a show on WLNG.
Oh, see, another thing I didn't know about
Yeah,
you.
every morning it was
what
on.
What did you talk about?
It was only a few minutes every day.
But
Talk about art and antiques.
Oh, cool.
And one day, Tony Pintero said to me, you should start to see if you can get some information about Cappy. So I started to talk about Cappy on the air. And a man called me, and he said, I'd like to come and see you. So he came to see me, and he brought me a milk box, and it had about 5 scrapbooks in it. So
Scrapbooks?
Scrapbooks. He goes, I'm only going to let you look at a few pages of each one. I said, what are they? He goes, these were Cappy Amundsen's scrapbooks.
Oh, wow.
And they had all his whole life in there.
How did he get them?
He got them from a sale from the house in the neighborhood. He did this woman a favor, and she gave him all these books. I said, what do you want from me? He said, $2,500. I said, I'll give you the $2,500 right now. And I took the thing. Well, one of the most
Do you still have them?
Well, I broke them down. Now I'm donating them to the library in Sag Harbor because I had pictures of Pollock and de Kooning in there.
Oh, how cool.
With him in Washington, in the Washington Square art show and things like that. I had, basically his life.
So what are you doing? You're breaking down, giving individual pictures to different people?
Yeah, I'm going to give them just a whole archive. I took them out to preserve them because I was afraid if I left them in the books, they would get destroyed. But one of the most fascinating things happened in the back of the scrapbook, there was a wedding invitation. And the guy's name was John Darrell Ray. And he was going to marry a Nancy Dennison Amundsen in Texas. I said to my wife, I said, I was in the Marine Corps in Vietnam with a guy, John Darrell Ray. She said, she goes, forget about it. I said, listen, in the Marine Corps, nobody uses their middle names. Only in the arts. I called this guy up and I said to him, are you John Darrell Ray? And he said, yes. I said, were you in the Marine Corps? He said, yes. I said, were you in the 1st Recon Battalion in Vietnam? He said, yes. I said, my name is Terry Wallace. He goes, I remember you. You were in the 1st Platoon in A Company.
Whoa.
He was marrying Amundsen's daughter. He had married Amundsen's daughter. And they had no longer been married. And he said to me, I said, could I talk to her? And I called her. And she said, I have not seen my father, did not see my father since I was 5 years old. And I'm not interested in talking about him. So in one of the books was just a little scrapbook of her life with him and the mother in Sag Harbor. So I took the book and I wrapped it up and I sent it to her.
Oh, how sweet.
And she sent me a letter about how it helped her heal.
Oh, wow.
From the relationship with her father. She never thought her father loved her. And that's probably one of the greatest things I got out of the book as far as, self-satisfaction, you know what I mean? Because then more recently, her granddaughter came to see me. And I've gotten to know the family, they've come to see me because the picture they had of their own grandfather.
So you've become the expert on Cappy, so to speak, in a way.
But he had so many stories, Patrick. I had to learn about Cappy Amundsen. If you went to Sag Harbor, you heard a Cappy story, you could hear 3 versions of it. So I had to read the Sag Harbor Express from 1945 to, I think I wrote it to 1995, every edition. And the East
Every edition or every edition that had something about Cappy?
Every paper.
Wow.
Every paper. And also for the East Hampton Star, I read from 1950 to 2000, every issue, to find out something about him. One of the things this guy did is he had a big show at Guildhall with Ralph Carpentier, and he founded the Marine Museum in Amagansett. I mean, this guy is an amazing, amazing person. I mean, for a guy who, really is kind of been forgotten about. And like I said earlier, for the book, I won the Best Nonfiction in the Northeast by the Independent Book Publishers Association.
So what year did you win that?
2002. 2011.
So it was the best nonfiction
In the Northeast,
in the Northeast by independent publishers?
Yeah.
That's
And
terrific.
the only reason that I submitted the work is because I'm always telling living artists, you should submit your work to an independent body, just so you get an idea. People will tell you the truth, what they think of it. Instead of your friends, I say, oh, yeah, I like it, or whatever.
Yeah, right.
And so I submitted the book, and I was very surprised I won, because I don't know how many entrants there were, but I was really happy. Not so much the award, I didn't care about that, but just that somebody else.
You brought attention to someone that needed to
Yeah.
have attention brought to
Yeah.
them, and you also had a healing effect on her
Yeah.
daughter,
The family.
on the
Yeah.
family in a way that was kind of.
It was
I
great.
get it.
I mean, it really was fascinating to me. I couldn't believe when the guy was in the Marine Corps. His daughter's husband, and so through that, I was very grateful for that. But since then, I have met so many other people that told me so many more things about Amundsen. One of the things
You're
Amundsen,
going to write it. You're going to do a little sequel.
I could probably do another one, but
what would you have a little title? Things left out, postscript.
I don't know.
Of new information I learned on Cappy.
Yeah.
Guess what? It goes so fast. We have like 30 seconds left.
Wow.
So, is there any? I mean, I want to tell everybody stop by. Terry's gallery in the passageway there opposite the movie theater. You're open 11 to
11 to 6. I'm usually there,
every
11
day,
to 5.
and it's WallaceGallery.com. Is that it?
Yeah, WallaceGallery.com, or
You could-
I'm on AskArt or ArtNet. I have some other things.
Oh, he has an amazing body of work and stuff that you can go through. I mean, I got a wonderful picture that it lives in
You
my.
still have Sikorsky.
Yeah, it's in my bedroom. I
remember.
see it every day. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, I remember that painting.
Terry, we're out of time.
Yep, good.
We're gonna-